have to turn in order to catch his gaze, to reassure myself that I was not imagining things. He did not try to hide his interest or avert his eyes, except, of course, when Father turned as well. Sometimes he was smiling, an expression I imagine he wore before I turned to look back at him. But more often there was a thoughtful, even a sad aspect to his features, which I could not understand, because looking at him made me happier than I had ever been. So happy and so confused. It was a week before I dared to write in my journal that I was in love. A love unconsummated and unspoken, but there was fuel enough for the fire, fuel to keep it burning, banked and all but forgotten for those 6 years when I saw nothing of him, heard nothing, did not even know if he had arrived safely in this country, or perished in the hold of some pestilential steamship, as so many of those immigrants were said to have done. My mother slept very lightly, perhaps on account of her illness. One night I was having an astonishingly vivid dream about Toma, a dream full of incidents and images of which I had no experience, not even an inkling. We were in a river together, and he had taken away my clothes, and I was not ashamed. I was calling his name, calling him to come and touch me, for I had literally no idea of what men and women actually do in such situations. And he was touching me, and the river was flowing around and through us with the most exquisite sensations, when I heard a harsh voice in my ear and felt a harsher hand on my shoulder, shaking me awake. I had indeed been calling to Toma, and this had roused my mother in the adjoining chamber. But it was I who had taken away those clothes, or fought free of the bedding, and I who touched myself. I do not believe that my father's sleep was disturbed by this drama. The next morning my mother managed to put in front of him an English newspaper full of speculation about the crisis in the Balkans, provoked by Austria's annexation of Bosnia and Herzegovina. In my wretchedness I took satisfaction in the mere recitation of those names, for I knew that Toma's country, Montenegro, was the neighbor to these, and the Austrians his sworn enemies. It was the opinion of this newspaper that war was imminent, and so my father found us passage on a liner leaving for New York the following day. We barely had time to pack, and I did not see Toma before our departure. I thought I would never see him again, and so I took a terrible risk, and gave all my pocket money to a porter who barely comprehended a word I said. Somehow I made him understand that he was to take my note of farewell and deliver it into the hands of the beautiful boy. From the diary of Harriet Bigelow Truscott, on the eve of her marriage, September 12, 1919. Part 1. 1914. Chapter 1. It had begun to snow, and she had been sitting in the car for so long that the snowflakes fixed themselves to the dark green cowling, for the motor was now as cold as she was. She did not know quite what time it was, only that the meeting between her father and Mr. Stevenson had been fixed for 2:30 in the afternoon, and they had driven at an immoderate speed down from Beecher's Bridge that morning, with her father wedged in the back by the great half-moon of iron, urging the driver to hurry. McEwen, a dour man in any circumstances, shrank into the collar of his coat and muttered to himself. "What's that you say, McEwen?" Her father must have seen rather than heard the remark, for his hearing was now reduced to the point where the only sounds that animated his reflections, other than conversation directed at him in very emphatic tones, were the thump and wheeze of the tub bellows at the Bigelow Iron Company, or the clear ringing of the trip hammer as it fell to the anvil, pounding, shaping, and purifying the glowing metal into bars. It was fortunate, she thought, that the sounds remaining to him, the bellows and the hammer, were so deeply reassuring. "I said, sir, it's no use asking me to go faster than the Packard wants to go. Without, it'll come to some harm. And that's a terrible weight of iron you've got on that seat with you, sir." Which, indeed it was, loaded into the car just before they left the Bigelow works. Looking at the light now, and allowing for the snow, which made the day both darker and brighter, she guessed that it was sometime after 4 o'clock, an hour etched in her mind by virtue of the whistle blast, marking the end of the shift in the furnace and forge. The eye knew that hour in all seasons, and the stomach too. Father had promised her a fine dinner at Delmonico's as soon as he had finished, had talked Stevenson around to his proposal, and he didn't imagine that would take very long at all. So, if you'll just sit here like a good girl. She had felt a burning in her cheeks, turned sharply in the direction of this remark, and found herself staring into the face of the fellow trying to shift the iron wheel off the seat and out of the car. A well-fleshed, confident, and not unattractive face. When the man caught her misdirected glance, he grinned and even, was she imagining this impertinence? Winked at her before taking the entire burden of the iron onto his flexed knees, turning and heaving it clear of the car with an explosive grunt. Like a good girl. She could make herself blush simply by repeating the words. Her father often spoke to her thus, out of distracted affection, and she did not mind it. But today she minded very much indeed, particularly as the automobile trip from Beecher's Bridge to New York City was hardly an opportunity to discuss what would be said, what must be said, to Mr. Stevenson. She had hoped her father would remember that she wanted, and out of no mere vanity, to be included in this discussion on which the fate of the Bigelow works very likely hung. It was Harriet who had brought to her father's attention the item in a trade journal, Iron and Steel News, about the John Stevenson Company's contract to supply 285 new subway cars to the IRT. "Isn't that the same Mr. Stevenson who once took us to the baseball game?" she asked, putting the magazine by his plate. Yes, he thought that very likely, and a few solemn forkfuls later he wondered how old Stevenson might be getting on. "Getting on very well indeed by the sound of it," Harriet replied, wondering how many wheels each of those many new cars was to have. Her father warmed to the idea of those wheels, then appropriated it as his own, and soon it grew to the proportions of a mania. He would not willingly entertain other topics of discussion, nor could Harriet qualify his enthusiasm for the project by any normal business considerations such as costs, scheduling, specifications, and possible modifications to the plant. The Bigelow Iron Company would manufacture the wheels as subcontractor to the John Stevenson Company. He and his old friend would see to that. Amos Bigelow became obsessed with catalogs, and where he might once have spent the better part of his day prowling the furnace building or engaging Horatio Washington in discussion about repair or modification of the breast wheel, the water wheel was a source of endless concern, he now spent his time perusing and annotating Hitchcock's machine tool list or the Patterson, Gottfried, and Hunter catalog of power transmission devices. Harriet, who attended to the ledgers at the works, noted the changed composition of the mail pouch and formed in her mind grim auguries of the future. Her father's enthusiasm for the Stevenson project knew no bounds or measure, and even today, when they had been so anxious about the time, he had made McEwen stop the car at Park Avenue and 142nd Street so that they might admire the Patterson-Gottfried billboard and the model looming out of the muddy expanse of pasture of what was proclaimed the largest wood pulley on earth. Harriet had undertaken the actual correspondence with Stevenson, though her father seemed to believe that he had already broached the business and received a reply. She showed her father draft after draft to reflect the refinements and reservations suggested by Horatio Washington and Mr. Brown, the foreman of the furnace, both of whom expressed doubt that so many wheels, her estimate, could be produced on any tight schedule. It was Horatio who pointed out that there hadn't been much snow this winter, and the holding ponds up the river on Great Mountain were already low. Come August, who knew what they'd be using for water? Stevenson's response, to Amos Bigelow, of course, rather than Harriet, was cordial but not very encouraging. Yes, he would be subcontracting the wheel assemblies along with many other items in the undercarriage and couplings, air brakes, upholstery, and, of course, the electrical systems. Certainly he remembered the pleasant association with Bigelow over these many years, and he had never heard the slightest complaint about any of Bigelow's products. Stevenson went on to say that he had already been in discussion with several foundries on the subject of wheels, and so it would come down to the matters of price and specifications. It was not yet clear whether iron wheels, granting the excellence of the Bigelow product, would do, or whether he must turn to the steel available from the open hearth operations in Pittsburgh. It was a complex decision, and he would be in touch when he had further information. There were, of course, other subcontracts to let. Had the Bigelow Works any experience in the manufacture of springs? The correspondence had been the occasion for Harriet's sudden education, her real education, in the ways and workings of the Bigelow Iron Company.